Hello, and welcome back to the Article 6 educational video series. I'm Kazuhisa Kawakutsu, Director of A6 IP Center. In our first video, we explored how carbon markets and Article 6 create opportunities for international climate cooperation. Today, we'll dive deeper into the practical ways countries collaborate under Article 6. Focusing on bilateral market-based approaches that unlock investment, share emission reductions, and raise ambition. By the end of this video, you'll be able to first explain the two main pathways for cooperation under Article 6, market-based and non-market-based. 2. Define internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, ITMOs, and double counting. 3. Describe how bilateral agreements enable mitigation projects. And 4th, identify how countries track and account for ITMOs from mitigation projects to ensure transparency. Different forms of cooperation under Article 6. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement offers countries a range of options for international cooperation to support implementation of their climate goals under the agreement. These include cooperation using carbon markets, as outlined in Article 6.2 and 6.4, and cooperation without using markets, as described in Article 6.8. Let's start with the market-based approaches. Under market-based cooperation, countries can work together to implement mitigation actions, and then share the results of these actions. When countries implement climate change mitigation activities, such as building renewable energy projects, improving energy efficiency, or protecting and restoring forests, they reduce their carbon emissions. These reductions are called mitigation outcomes. These mitigation outcomes represent real climate progress. And under Article 6, countries have option to transfer some of those results to other countries. For example, a country that hosts a renewable energy project might allow another country, perhaps one that helped fund or support the project, to use the resulting emission reductions towards meeting its own nationally determined contribution, or NDC, or for other international mitigation purposes, such as use by airline operators under the Global Aviation Offset Scheme, so-called COSIA. By using market mechanisms, governments can incentivize businesses to direct international investment towards helping countries meet their goals under the Paris Agreement. To ensure this system is robust and transparent, Article 6.2 provides clear guidance for accounting, reporting, and review. This helps prevent double counting, promotes transparency, and ensures environmental integrity. But how are these mitigation outcomes being generated? One way is through Article 6.4 mechanism, also known as the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, or PACM. This mechanism allows businesses to implement emission reduction projects in host countries. These projects are certified and generate Article 6.4 emission reductions, which can be used for various purposes, including voluntary climate action. However, if approved by the governments involved, these reductions can be also used towards nationally determined contributions or other international climate goals. In short, governments cooperate, businesses act, and climate benefits are shared. At the same time, Article 6 recognizes that countries may collaborate without transferring carbon credits. That's where Article 6.8 comes in. This part of the Paris Agreement establishes a framework for non-market approaches. These forms of cooperation do not involve the transfer of mitigation outcomes. The framework focuses on promoting sustainable development and poverty eradication through collaborations in areas like finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. Countries learn from each other, align their actions, and strengthen their climate efforts through a shared work program. Key concepts: ITOMOS, double counting, and authorization. Let's return to the market-based approaches and explore some of the most important concepts. When countries implement climate change mitigation activities, like renewable energy projects or reforestation, they reduce their carbon emissions and generate mitigation outcomes. Each country keeps a kind of carbon account where these outcomes are tracked as progress towards its nationally determined contributions, or NDC, its national climate target under the Paris Agreement. Now, one of the unique features of Article 6 is that countries can cooperate by transferring some of these mitigation outcomes to other countries. For example, a host country where mitigation activities take place might allow part of the mitigation outcomes to be transferred to the acquiring country who financed the project to use towards its own climate goals. These transferred outcomes are called internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, or ITOMs. At the same time, a part of mitigation outcomes may remain with the host country and contribute to the country's mitigation efforts. But here is where it gets tricky. Once an ITOMOS is transferred, it must be counted only once. That means only the acquiring country can include it in its own emission reduction target. The host country, which originally achieved emission reduction, must not count the same ITOMOS towards its own climate goal, for example, by adding it to its own emission balance. This accounting rule is critical to avoid what we call double counting. Double counting would mean that both countries claim credit for the same emission reduction, giving the false impression that more climate progress has been made than actually occurred. This would undermine the environmental integrity of the Paris Agreement, distort climate data, and weaken the trust in international cooperation. Think of it like a financial transaction between countries. If one country transfers a credit, the other country receives it, and both countries must adjust their ledgers accordingly, just like in double entry bookkeeping. That's why, under Article 6.2, transparency and robust accounting rules are essential. Countries need to track who is transferring what, to whom, for what purpose, and make sure their official climate reporting reflects those transfers accurately. Can these mitigation outcomes just be transferred however a country wants to be used for whatever purpose? Not quite. That's where another key concept comes in: authorization. Each country has control over which mitigation outcomes can be transferred and for what purpose. This decision is done through a formal act of authorization issued by the country's designated national authority. With this authorization, mitigation acts can be used towards another country's nationally determined contribution for international mitigation schemes like carbon offsetting and reduction schemes for international aviation, for other purposes, even for voluntary use by private companies if the government allows it. Authorization ensures that each transfer is consistent with the country's climate strategy, legal framework, and international commitments. To maintain trust and impact, countries must ensure their cooperation is of high integrity. This means aligning with the Paris Agreement goals, supporting sustainable development, ensuring transparent governance, and safeguarding against social, environmental, and economic harm. It also includes respecting human rights and, where possible, contributing to climate adaptation and overall global emissions reductions. How countries cooperate through Article 6.2. So, how does international cooperation under Article 6.2 actually work in practice? There are two main ways countries put this into action: cooperation on mitigation projects and linking emission trading systems. The most common form of cooperation today involves direct collaboration between two countries. One country, called the acquiring country, supports the mitigation project in another country, the host country. These projects are jointly agreed upon by both countries and can include a wide range of activities, from renewable energy installations to advanced technology that remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and store them underground. Once emissions are reduced, part of the resulting mitigation outcomes are transferred and counted as ITOMOS. The acquiring country can then use these outcomes to help meet its own climate targets. For example, Switzerland has signed implementation agreements with countries such as Thailand, Ghana, and Vanuatu. Some example mitigation activities include e-mobility, alternate wetting and drying for sustainable rice growing, and solar electrification for ITOMOS generation. Japan is partnering with countries like Mongolia, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand through the Joint Credit Mechanism, or JCM, to support projects such as high-efficiency cooling system, waste-to-energy initiatives, and solar PV installations. Singapore has established cooperation with countries such as Ghana, Papua New Guinea, and Bhutan, aiming to develop high-integrity carbon credit projects in sectors like nature-based solutions and early coal phase-out. Sweden is also partnering with countries like Ghana, Zambia, and Nepal under Article 6.2 bilateral cooperation agreements to support pilot projects that generate ITOMOS. Other countries include South Korea and Norway, who are working with various countries to support low emissions transition. These real-world partnerships show how Article 6.2 helps countries collaborate in a structured and transparent way, accelerating global climate action while supporting sustainable development, where it's needed most. Another form of international cooperation is by linking emissions trading systems, or ETS. An emission trading system is a market where companies buy and sell permits to emit a certain amount of greenhouse gases. Governments cap the total emissions and issue allowances, creating a financial incentive to reduce emissions. Under Article 6.2, countries can link their ETS across borders. This means a company in one country can purchase and use emission allowances from another country's emission trading system to meet its own compliance target. One example of this type of cooperation is a link established between Norway and European Union ETS. In this system, companies in Norway can buy and use EU-issued emission allowances to meet their domestic compliance obligations. While these allowances are not ITOMOS themselves, Article 6.2 provides a framework for countries like Norway and the EU to account for the mitigation impacts that result from this kind of linking, ensuring they are properly reflected in each country's progress towards their nationally determined contributions. This kind of cooperation can be reported under Article 6.2 using corresponding adjustments to maintain transparency and avoid double counting. Building the framework for bilateral cooperation. Now, once two countries decide to cooperate bilaterally on mitigation activities, like the examples we just saw with Japan or Switzerland, what happens next? They can't just shake hands and start trading ITOMOS. A successful partnership under Article 6.2 requires a well-defined framework for cooperation. This ensures that both sides are aligned, not just politically, but technically and operationally. Let's look at what this framework typically includes. Most bilateral cooperation begins with a formal agreement, usually a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, or an implementation agreement. This document lays the foundation for how the two countries will collaborate on mitigation activities. When developing such cooperation, countries may typically establish mutual understanding on the following key areas. Number 1, how mitigation activities will be developed and financed. Mitigation projects might be developed by a single project developer or through partnerships between developers from the host and acquiring countries. Financing can take different forms. Some governments provide upfront investment support, while others use result-based payments, where credits are only paid for once emission reductions are transferred. Number 2, what standards or principles will be applied to calculate emission reductions? Countries may agree on the set of standards or methodologies used to estimate the mitigation outcomes, or consider on a case-by-case basis. These standards must, at the minimum, meet key principles under Article 6.2, ensuring environmental integrity, sustainable development, and transparency. Number 3, how mitigation outcomes, ITOMOS, will be authorized, transferred, and recognized. There should be a clear process for selecting and authorizing mitigation activities, as well as for sharing and transferring ITOMOS. Countries might, for example, choose a jointly review project proposals and establish a communication framework to approve and track ITOMO flows. Number 4. How to avoid double counting. Double counting can seriously undermine the credibility of carbon markets. That's why countries must set up a framework that allows for close coordination, especially on how ITOMOS are recorded and reported. By aligning their registry systems and reporting practices, both countries can ensure consistency and compliance with Article 6.2 guidance. Number 5. Authorization and tracking systems. Finally, each country must establish a competent national authority, an official body responsible for authorizing ITOMOS that can be transferred, and for what purpose. They must also have access to a registry system that tracks ITOMOS and enables them to report the required information to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. All of this ensures that bilateral cooperation is robust, transparent, and in full alignment with international rules. It's this kind of thoughtful setup that helps Article 6 deliver real impact on the ground, while maintaining trust and integrity in the system. A recent example of bilateral cooperation under Article 6.2 is a joint project between Japan and Mongolia through the Joint Creative Mechanism, JCM. The project involves the installation of a 12.7 megawatt solar power plant in the suburb of Ulaanbaatar with solar panels placed on elevated structures that allow for dual land use, combining power generation and agriculture, so-called agrivoltaics. Project development and finance. A Japanese developer partners with Mongolian institutions with support from Japan's Ministry of the Environment. Mitigation outcome. Emission reductions are calculated using JCM-approved solar energy methodology. Authorization. These outcomes were authorized for transfer under the JCM as ITOMOS. Core benefits. The project supports renewable energy transition and increases agricultural productivity through smart land use. Transparency. Tracking and reporting are carried out via the JCM registry systems, ensuring full alignment with Article 6.2 guidance. This project reflects how well-structured bilateral partnerships can advance clean energy and sustainable land use simultaneously. Another example comes from Sweden and Ghana, where cooperation under Article 6.2 supports an e-mobility program aimed at reducing emissions from the transport sector. Developed in partnership with South Pole and local stakeholders, the program introduces electric 2- and 3-wheelers for delivery services and commuting in urban areas, replacing traditional fossil fuel vehicles. Project development and finance. The program is structured around result-based finance, with implementation led by private and public actors in Ghana and support from Sweden. Mitigation outcome. Emission reductions are quantified through performance-based methodologies tailored to vehicle electrification. Authorization. Ghana and Sweden have agreed to transfer mitigation outcomes as ITOMOS under Article 6.2, ensuring proper accounting and transparency. Sustainable development. In addition to climate benefits, the program promotes green jobs, reduces air pollution, and supports Ghana's broader sustainable transport goals. Transparency. Registry and reporting procedures are designed to prevent double counting and meet Article 6.2 requirements. This cooperation highlights how Article 6.2 can support innovative, low-carbon technologies in developing countries while delivering measurable and verifiable climate impact. So, what did we learn today? We started by looking at the two main ways countries can cooperate under Article 6. Through market-based approaches like emission trading and mitigation projects, and through non-market approaches, focusing on collaboration in finance, technology, and capacity building. We learned what ITOMOS are, how they are generated and transferred, and why avoiding double counting is so critical for maintaining trust and transparency in the system. We explored how bilateral agreements are formed, including how countries decide on project standards, financing, authorization, and how to track and transfer mitigation outcomes. And finally, we saw how countries track and adjust their national accounts to ensure every emission reduction is properly counted, supporting global efforts to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video, where we will look at how countries can develop enabling frameworks to support Article 6 projects, ensuring clarity, transparency, and strong implementation.